Hello, class. How are you doing? Welcome to our lesson for today's session on cognitive development. For today's session, here are our learning outcomes. First, state the basic concepts of cognitive development, discuss Piaget's developmental stages, and explain the educational implications of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. First up, let's have a look on John Piaget's background. John Piaget was a Swiss psychologist known for his work on child development. His theory on cognitive development. John Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that intelligence changes as children grow. A child's cognitive development is not just about acquiring knowledge. The child has to develop or construct a mental model of the world. Okay, so if you are an education student, you will encounter John Piaget a lot in your professional education subjects. Okay, before we go into the very theory of Piaget, let's have a look on the basic concepts first. First one is cognition. Cognition refers to the process of faculties by which knowledge is acquired and manipulated. The study of cognition is the study of how human beings receive, process, integrate, and respond to information. Attention, memory, executive function, convergent thinking, and divergent thinking are some of the cognitive processes that have been studied in children with and without disabilities. These cognitive processes are crucial for learning in and out of the classroom. Cognition is usually thought of as being mental. That is, cognition is a reflection of a mind. It is not directly observable. We cannot see the process whereby, for example, an 8-year-old discovers that Mickey Mouse doll continues to exist even though it is hidden under a blanket out of her sight, nor can we directly assess the steps of a 6-year-old uh, child who takes to compute the answer to the problem, say 2 plus 2. Although we cannot see or directly measure what underlies children's performance on these and other tasks, we can infer what is going on in their heads by assessing certain aspects of their behavior. That is, cognition is never measured directly, it is inferred from the behaviors we can observe, right? Next one is development. Development refers to the changes in structure or function over time with an individual. Okay, so at its most basic term, it encompasses changes now that works or that happens within an individual. Next up is structure. So we'll try to connect development, structure, and function later on. But let's have structure first. Structure refers to some substrate of the organism, such as nervous tissue, muscle, or limbs, or in cognitive psychology, the mental knowledge that underlies intelligence. When we guys speak of cognitive development, we use structure to mean some hypothetical mental construct, faculty, or the ability that frames knowledge and changes with age, and that changes with age. For example, children's knowledge of terms such as dog, cat, lion, and giraffe could be construed as existing in some sort of mental structure. Think of it like a mental dictionary with the meanings of these words changing over time. Or we could hypothesize some form of mental organization that permits children to place objects in serial arrays according to height from shortest to tallest. In contrast naman guys, function denotes actions related to a structure. These include actions external to the structure being studied, such as the neurochemical or the hormonal secretions and other factors external to the individuals that can best be described as experience. That is, external sources of simulation. Function can also be internal in that, um, for example, the exercise of a muscle, the firing of a nerve cell, or the activation of a cognitive process such as retrieving from the memory the name of our say first grade teacher, or computing the answer to a problem, say 20 plus 20. Now, with the respect to cognitive development, function refers to some actions by the child, such as retrieving the definition of a word from memory, making comparisons between two stimuli, or adding two numbers to arrive at the answer. Development is a characteristic of the species of individuals and has its basis in biology. Its general course, therefore, is relatively predictable. By viewing development as biological concept that is generally predictable across all members of the species, we do not mean to imply that experience and culture do not also play a role in development. So those are the interrelatedness of development, structure and function, and even cognition. So it's important, guys, that we we know what these basic concepts are, so that by the time that we discuss the developmental stages later on, you can actually relate already. So the following slides now provide us a brief discussion of Piaget's underlying assumptions regarding the stages of development. So, cognitive development has been studied in the context of several theories of cognitive development. It is one, Piaget's theory is one of those. Piaget's developmental stage theory posited that a combination of maturation and non linguistic experiences during early childhood shape an individual's cognitive development. He further proposed that children are organizing the world around them through mental operations that become more complex and complex as they become adult, through adolescence. Children progress from the sensory motor stage of physical exploration to pre-operational stage of creating mental representations and engaging in role playing to the concrete and formal operational stages involving information organization, perspective taking, and reasoning. Okay, so Piaget's theory focuses on development and learning theories. The development focus on the learner's capabilities, and the learning focuses on the realization of such capabilities, and the education within the theory is extrinsic. The cognitive theory, the behavior reflects the emergence of various psychological structures, organized units, or patterns of thinking that influence on how children interpret the information. An important implication of Piaget's theory, guys, is what we call adaptation. No? Adaptation of instruction to the learner's developmental level. The content of instruction needs to be consistent with developmental level of the learner. This is practically reflected, no? Kailangan mag-reflect siya sa syllabus. That's why when we craft our syllabus, our learning plan, we back it up with theories. Now, what are the theories that could um, explain why we arrange, these lessons this way and not the other way around? So the teacher's role is to facilitate learning by providing a variety of experiences that will allow children to learn, to develop, no, on their respective stages, as what Piaget is explaining in his theory. Teachers should obviously provide opportunities for learners to explore and experience by encouraging them to learn something new. Piaget emphasizes the opportunities that allow learners of different cognitive levels to work together and encourage less mature students to advance to create understanding. The further implication for instruction is the use of concrete hands on experiences to help learners learn additional suggestions. Piaget also, guys, emphasizes that teachers should allow opportunities to classify and group information to facilitate assimilating new information with previous knowledge. Now, along with the different stages of in Piaget's theory, we also come to encounter a schema or schemas. The schema is the building block of knowledge. I'm sorry for the typo. The schema is actually the different sensory motor map that the learner constructs about their world and their knowledge development. Gradually, as a learner develops the ability to represent the outer world in the internal images and the thoughts, at this point, the operations, which are logical thoughts, become possible for a learner to perform. A child's schemas are constructed through the process of assimilation and accommodation. We'll discuss these two later on. A schema describes both the mental and physical actions involved in understanding and knowing. Schemas are categories of knowledge that help learners to interpret and understand the world. In Piaget's view, a schema includes both a category of knowledge and the process of obtaining that knowledge. As experiences happen, this very new information is used to modify, to add to, or even change previously existing information or schemas. Another concept is adaptation process that enable transition from one stage to another. So adaptation process is the inborn tendency to adjust, more attuned to conditions imposed by the environment. Piaget sees the learner as the actively engaged in an ongoing process of adaptation or transformation. Learners adapt by continually organizing and reorganizing the information and experiences they get in their everyday life. The process creates the better fit between the world as the learner experiences it and the new information and the way he or she understands it. Learners are constantly challenged the by with the new information from their environment around them from infancy onwards. Now, learners construct more complex cognitive structures of their world in their mind to organize, understand, and adapt. Another one, guys, is called equilibrium. Equilibrium is when the learner moves towards more complex or effective way of organizing and dealing with the world. Equilibrium, according to Piaget, is regarded as the engine that drives the development of a learner. It is actually the cognitive structures that accommodate the learner information instead of the new knowledge. We say the learner equilibrates, right? In the equilibrium, the assimilation and accommodation interact continuously, and accommodation opens a possibility of assimilation and vice versa in an ever expanding cycle. The changes or expansions in learner's mind have to be organized and kept in order and dynamic balance across the learner's cognitive structures. The cognitive conflicts occur when the learner is confronted with the new information which he or she cannot deal with in terms of the current cognitive structures. So Piaget guys believed that humans are also adapt to their physical and social environments in which uh, in which they live in. The process of adaptation begins since birth. No? Piaget saw this adaptation in terms of two basic processes. And these are the processes of adaptation that Piaget believed in. First is assimilation. I have keep on repeating this. I have kept repeating this one earlier. In assimilation refers to the process by which new objects and events are grasped or incorporated within the scope of existing schemes or structures. In other words, kung ano lang yung meron naka-stored na information, yun lang din yung mag-grasp no, ng say ng tao. No, accommodation naman, it is the process through which the existing scheme or structure is modified to meet the resistance to straightforward grasping or assimilation of a new object or event. So if you notice assimilation existing within the scope of existing schemes or structures, with the accommodation there is modifying, grasping or assimilation of new object or event. According to Piaget, let's take a look at more on these two processes. According to Piaget, assimilation is the components of the adaptation when the information arises that can fit into the learner existing knowledge is added into the learner's cognitive structures. This information adds to the extents that the learner's mind structure or cognitive structures. It actually occur if the knowledge that learning is not too dissimilar to learner's existing knowledge. No, it can be assimilated or added to the existing cognitive structures. Then the learner's cognitive structures is extended, meaning the new knowledge add to what the learner has already known. Example, in mathematics grade 9, the lesson highlight the very basics of linear equations. Consider it in grade 8 learners are familiar with this type of equation where solving x require the use of additive inverse and dividing by coefficient of x. So this is very mathematical, but um we can get the concept. No? Then that was in lesson, no, grade 9 lesson, mathematics grade 9 lesson. Then in lesson 2, learners are given the unknown values on both sides of equal signs. Learners move all the unknown values to the left by canceling values on the right using additive inverse and solve x as done in lesson 1. So um the learners are making use of their existing knowledge no in the previous lesson to be able to solve na incorporate that with what is going on with solving the current problem that he or that they are in. That is what we call assimilation. Accommodation. According to Piaget, accommodation is the component of the adaptation and is actually when the new information arises that contradicts or conflicts with the learner's cognitive structure. In accommodation, learner has to adjust and reshape his or her cognitive structure so that new information can be fitted or accommodated in learner's mind. It actually occurs if the new knowledge is very dissimilar to the existing knowledge and it cannot be linked within the existing knowledge. The disequilibrium occur, meaning the learner's cognitive structure is either modified or changed in order to accommodate the new knowledge. Example, if the grade 10 learners are first time exposed to say quadratic equations, on the lesson 1, the teacher asked them to solve x and learners try to use the grade 9 existing knowledge of linear equations, but learners' answers will be incorrect. Learners first need to understand that these are two equations and of course require two different methods to solve them. So the teacher have to assist learners to change their cognitive structures, which or in other words, kailangan ni teacher i-explain na yung equations na ginamit na sa grade 9 are not the same with the are not the ones that they are going to use to solve the problem that their teacher gives them in grade 10. So they have to modify, they have to change in order for these children, these learners to accommodate new knowledge. And that is, in this case, the new equation. So the teacher and the learner can change the learner's cognitive structures through teaching and learning for understanding the new concepts of quadratic equations to change the learner's cognitive structure. So you see the difference between assimilation and accommodation. Okay, now let's move on to the stages of development postulated by Piaget. Piaget believed that all children progress through four stages and that they do so in the same order. Okay, during a stage of cognitive development, there is a unique level of analysis, internal organization, and the understanding of the environmental information and events. Piaget's theory shows clearly that child's understanding is only dependent on the stage that he or she has reached, and teachers ought to take this into account as they teach learners at different levels of intellectual development. The first, okay, the first stage is called sensory motor stage. This comes from birth to 2 years or infancy. In the first stage, in the growth and development of a child, children have the basic structure of organizing and adapting to their environment, and their behavior tend to be circular and also develop an elementary understanding of the things around. It is in this stage, guys, where the child acquire language, which enhances their social and intellectual development. This stage is actually the form of thought or intelligence as observed in the child's actions. The child's schema is simple and very limited to what the child can explore through the body and senses. So they are making use of their senses for them to acquire information, okay, and that they can imitate them. The stage lasts from birth of a child to the age of about 2 years. Child inherent tendency to organize its world as it develops. Some methods of classifying objects and experiences through making use of senses, no, although basics take shape as a result of secondary circular reactions. Okay, so in this stage is also characterized by the progressive acquisition of object permanence in which the child becomes able to find objects after they have been displaced, even if the objects have been taken out of his field of vision. So parang ma-identify na niya kahit um yang itago-tago god, itry mo siya kahit tas i-show mo again. So the child, even so that you do that, the child can actually um try to recognize it already. The next stage is pre-operational stage. This is about 7 years. Okay, the characteristic of this stage include an increase in language ability with overgeneralization, symbolic thought, egocentric perspective and limited logic. In this second stage, children should engage with problem solving tasks that incorporate available materials such as blocks, sand, and water. Apparently, di ba, yung mga binibili, clay dough and all the materials, you know, toys, educational toys. Okay, so in this stage, the child in this stage is able to reason and give logical train of thoughts, but not simple logic. Ano. The child used the objects and symbols to represent something which exists in concrete form. Right? For example, child play with a car as if it is a real car. Okay? Or a child plays a motorcycle as if it is a real motorcycle. At this stage, the child is not able to conceptualize abstractly and needs concrete physical situations. That's why you often see if the if ang bahay merong mga may bata no, na 7 years old. If you notice, you get to see more often ng mga daming toys, visuals, because they have to make sense, they make use of their senses. Kaya makita nila, may mga flashcards sa walls and those stuffs because they are not yet able to conceptualize, they are still having a hard time conceptualizing things abstractly. So they need concrete physical situations for them to grasp things. It is also it is also during this stage where the child um language, thinking, imagination, problem solving develop faster. A child can be able to work with images and symbols. So the child can recognize the properties of the object even if they might be changed around and look different. So they can actually identify. Unlike the first stage wherein um they have difficulty identifying once there are changes that um that take changes that take place in a particular object. But for under the pre-operational change, a child can already, are able to a child is able to identify already if there is some changes, in an object. It can still identify the object. So children's vocabulary increases and their sentences progress from one and two word phrases to complete full sentences. Children can also take in other points of view and take into account more than one perspective. The pre-operational stage child can be characterized by the animism, egocentrism, transductive reasoning, psychorism, lack of dissenting, lack of the classification, lack of observation, etc. So, if we are to take a look at it behaviorally, yung pag 7 years old, di ba gusto nila if they are playing with another 7 year old, they would always want to claim things. Akin to kasi egocentric. Akin to. So they don't have that sense of sharing yet. Not so much. Okay. Next one is concrete operational stage. This is from 7 to 11 years. So in this stage, a child is capable of using logical processes of reasoning on the basis of concrete evidence. Children who attain formal operations are said to reason in terms of theories and abstractions as well as concrete realities. It is in this stage also that problem solving and reasoning is powerful enough to last the rest of life. This is also characterized by remarkable cognitive growth when children's development of language and acquisition of basic skills accelerate dramatically. So very critical, especially with language, no? With providing children with comprehensive language input. Children at this stage utilize their senses in order to know, things. Now they can now consider two or three dimensions simultaneously instead of successively. For example, in liquids, if the child notices the lowered level of the liquid, he also notices the dish is wider, seeing both dimensions are the same time. So this one, there is actually a term for this, which is known as conservation. So in the picture, the child is shown two glasses of liquid. Okay. The other glass is quite long. The other one is short but has a bigger dimension. Okay. So in this stage, the child can actually recognize that um that despite the change of the appearance of the glass, no, the amount of liquid, the quantity of liquid that is inside these two glasses are actually the same. Only that the containers are different. But the amount of liquid that are in both glasses are actually the same. So this is what we call conservation. So in this stage, a child can start to identify the difference. Okay, unlike in the previous stage, na they would have difficulty identifying. Now, if there is like change, especially, di ba dati, when we are asked when we are given a choice to choose between this glass type of glass over the other, would always want get to get this uh glass na feeling natin mas maraming laman. Although pareho lang naman siya na amount, 'no. Halimbawa juice, kasi ang gusto natin talaga yung feeling natin marami yung laman sa paningin natin. But, we later on realized na only the appearance is different, but the one that is inside are ones that the one that is inside is actually the same. So later na realize natin yan. So it doesn't matter. Next is formal operation stage. This is from 11 years upward. Thinking is not only abstract but also logical. The reasoning engaged in is not driven necessarily by the presence of the concrete object. So in this stage, children can now generate the potential solutions to the problem in fashion. The social context is more important in this stage. The concrete examples are required to help a child understand abstract relationships. So the child's stage is already capable of forming hypotheses and deducing possible consequences, allowing the child to construct his or her own mathematics. Furthermore, the child typically begins to develop abstract thought patterns where reasoning is executed using pure symbols without the necessity of perceptive data. So this is the highest level of thinking stage, and in Piaget's um, developmental stage, where the child is now capable of going beyond the concrete evidence, going beyond, the sensory sensory things. Like they don't need with children this stage don't need to actually touch it for them to know. They can actually tell. Okay, so they have already developed things. They are already they are able to form hypotheses and they do things already. Okay, also children can now perform the variety of tasks involving the use of hypothesis. So the learner's thoughts can be fostered by placing learners in a situation where they have to solve problems. So yeah, they are confronted with problems, no, that they need to solve. Okay. So what are the educational implications of these cognitive development theory? Now the very thing that we have to look into. Ano bang implications ng theory na ito or cognitive development? Active engagement and exploration, inheritance, and maturation, as well as experience alone, cannot explain the cognitive development. Cognitive development based on learners' active engagement with exploration of their physical and social world. Teaching and learning need to be active. Okay, exploratory processes if the teacher optimizes things out to experiment and discover things, to question, discuss, and to reflect and solve problems themselves. Cognitive development is an even process. Okay, different learner make gear shift at different time and different learning areas, social context in which a child is developing, and demands of that context influence the learner's progression. A teacher interpret Piaget's stage in terms of limitation than in progressive potential. Emphasis on potential make teaching very different processes from an emphasis on limitation. Quality of thinking, difference between adult and child's thinking has to do with the difference in thinking quality and have important implications for understanding moral, social, and emotional aspects of development. And those aspects relate to child's understanding of social relations and affect how they deal with moral and social and emotional issues as they develop. Okay? So marami siya, no? It would also help us, give us um, several ideas to reflect upon what we teach in the class. And we don't expect much, diba? So that we wouldn't expect much and that we align our lessons according to the developmental stages of the learners. Although, yes, it is true that there isn't something that is definite. Now, this might a 7-year-old kid who grows up in an urban area would be different from a 7-year-old who grows up in a rural area. So there are other factors that may contribute to the differences. And that is something that Vygotsky and behaviorism can explain. But for this one, no, well, for one thing personally that I've learned is that the cognitive developmental stages, particularly that of Piaget, would help us really in, providing opportunities for our learners, no, opportunities that are fitted or are fitting to their level, no, so that we provide them with ample time to practice, with ample opportunities to discover, to explore, and leverage the kind of potential that they have, the kind of skills that they are in. Or para bang ano yung heighten nila na skills, halimbawa kung masyado silang magalaw kasi their sensory motors or they are physically active because they are still young. Um we make use of that heightened aspect sa kanila para maka-provide tayo ng opportunities for them to learn, 'di ba? Um, Provide tasks, no, activities that would help them develop, no, that could aid their cognitive development. Okay. The next one is some strategies to support cognitive skill development for children who are deaf or hard of hearing or D or HH. No, so this one naman, these strategies are from the study of Soman, but the date is not indicated. So there are six strategies here. These are particularly intended for those children who have difficulty hearing, although it might also work for children who do not have hearing problems. Okay, so first strategy is familiarize yourself with age appropriate cognitive skills for your students. So we may need to refer to the developmental checklist and grade level learning standards. However, we do not have to base our expectation on chronological age or grade level alone. We take into account the child or children's hearing age as well as language proficiency. For example, even though by age of 4, children are expected to engage in cooperative problem solving, a child with hearing loss who has the language skills of a 2-year-old will have difficulty achieving this goal. Not because of her inability to to solve a problem, but of his or her inability to communicate with his or her peers about the problem solving. So we have to be familiarized with the 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 level, the age appropriate cognitive skills of our students. Although it is not to say na it's absolute, no, but we have to consider as well those, especially those who children who may have difficulty. That's what this um course is all about, 'di ba? Special and inclusive education. Okay, foundations of special and inclusive education. So next strategy is identify the cognitive skills required in the various activities your students participate in. So some activities that you can work on. So age appropriate play activities and routine classroom activities rely on particular language and cognitive skills. So I have here a few examples on math, science, history, and geography. What activities can you do and what cognitive skills are aligned or can be touched with these activities? The next strategy, guys, is observe your students and identify if any difficulties are attributable to listening skills, limited knowledge proficiency, and or underdeveloped cognitive skills. Identifying which skill needs to be addressed is not easy, and that it requires some observation and analysis on the teacher's part. For example, a student who struggles with retelling a sequence based story might have difficulty with remembering the sequence of an event or formulating the sentences to retell the story. One way to further evaluate the student's skill would be to provide the student with visuals of the sequence and ask him or her to retell the story. If the student retells the story successfully, it is indicative that of his difficulty with remembering a sequence of events because um, the visuals help na the child to sequence the story. So it is indicative na maybe meron difficulty ang child sa on memorization kasi hindi niya ma-retell. But with the use of visuals, the child can now retell the story successfully. So if the child doesn't benefit from the visuals or adding or if hindi mag-work sa kanya yung visual, additional probing is required, no, such as ask additional way of doing it. No, you have to find ways anyway, such as asking him or her to retell a story or event that is less complicated or more familiar. You can also do that. Observing students' performance in activities that do and don't require certain cognitive skills can provide insight into our language and cognitive ability, into their language and cognitive abilities. Okay? I think this is not only true not to children with special needs, but also to regular classes that we have, right? So we make again, no, we have to observe. No, we do formative assessments. No, we do ongoing assessments to our students on how they respond to our tasks, right? So while observation, we might see, no, which which part of the or activity they might have difficulty working on, or probably you can detect some. issues on their cognitive level. Okay? The next strategy, guys, is evaluate how your lessons and teaching strategies promote development of cognitive skills. Identifying which skill needs to be addressed is not easy and requires some observation and listen to teacher's part. That's true. This particular strategy will help us see that there might be several skills that we have been targeting all along. So, this is to be more mindful and explicit with about the learning targets and ensure that the teacher that we are addressing a variety of skills. So there are like this one, okay? So cognitive skill and some questions that we can work on like observing, okay? So okay. Does the language I use promote thinking? We also ask ourselves like am I asking questions that provide opportunities to use a variety of cognitive skills? So there are this is now our on the art of questioning. Now, observing what do you see, compare how are they alike instead of just saying compare and contrast the two events. Now we can actually ask a question or ask questions like how are they alike? How are they different? Are they similar? Are they different? Okay, then classify and categorizing which ones go together. Can we group these together? Can we group these events together or objects together instead of just saying okay, classify this, categorize this. Then organizing, computing, and analyzing data. How many types of category do you have, etc. Sequencing what happened before, deducing and inferring how does the girl feel instead of okay, deduce this particular this particular events. Okay, predicting what will happen next, what would happen next. So these are prompts nor questions that would allow us to evaluate the um and not only evaluate but also promote cognitive promote development of cognitive skills kasi they would also think mapapaisip sila. Next strategy is develop activities that focus on specific cognitive skills while addressing listening and language targets. So, once we have identified the cognitive skills that are developmentally appropriate for our students and our students' current proficiency, we can incorporate cognitive skills into our auditory and language activities. Now, the following are these. Okay, we have a memory. Let's start with memory. So, what? What can we do with memory? Many children who are having problems with their or who have lost their hearing or hard hearing have difficulties in memory. Working memory interventions haven't been particularly beneficial, and it's unknown of practicing strategies for remembering sequences or separate pieces of information is beneficial. However, implementing activities that incorporates memory practice is in a natural manner can allow children to practice and develop compensatory strategies. Like playing a simple game of telephone can help students practice attending to and retaining information. Another one is we can also do learning. We can also do action song, learning an action song because it the more that you because it is fun no mara-register siya like you do macarena, okay, macarena macarena yung ganyan, and doing the actions in a forwards and backward sequence can provide practice with motor sequencing para ma-practice sila. Then observing, okay, so here is the activity and what you can do. So present the student with a small plant. Tapos there is like a dialogue. What do you see? So again, a prompt ano siya no, question. I see hair. Yes, those have a special name. They are called roots. They help the plant get water from the dirt. Another one, pass the plant to the next student. This interaction can also promote social interactions. I see green circles. That's the response to teacher. Yes, those are called leaves. Another one, ask students to draw the plant and help them label. This will promote cognition, fine motor, and language skills, etc. And the activity goes on. Next is classifying. So another there is a dialogue. During snack, give each student graph paper with large squares, then serve Fruit Loops or colored goldfish. Sort the snack into groups. Sort means make groups of things that go together. Students do not have enough language to follow these directions, demonstrate, and teach the target language. Student 1, tell me what groups you made. So you do this one. So this particular activity allows them to classify objects, and data. So, 'di ba? Daming magawa. Okay? Then deducing and inferring. So choose a picture book in which characters go through a series of emotions. So what do you see on this page? Flora and her brothers or sisters. How do you think they feel? So again, um asking a good question is important. Okay? If there is like a difficulty, if you feel like the students are not responding, then probably there is something wrong with the question. You have to revise the question, to simplify the question in order for the the students to understand. No, it's not, after all, a, a test of questions. No, it's not a test whether whether they know how to create a question, di ba? But how they are able to understand the question so that they could give you the concept that you are expecting from them. Then strategy 6 is monitoring progress in a systematic manner. Okay, this is of course, um, you know, incorporate cognitive skills. Sorry, on this is when we are going to create, no, a set of tasks for our students that are constantly monitored. Okay, we provide them a monitoring. Now, if possible, even with our extensive efforts to develop cognitive skills, children who are or who continue to possess, difficulties may require monitoring. So we do the monitoring systematically. It is important for us to evaluate their ability to sort objects, for example, based on features. So you'll have your systematic way of dealing that one. So it is obviously, in conclusion, guys, no, it is obviously possible to incorporate Piaget's theory in the classroom. Piaget takes a constructivist point of view and believes that learners are not passive in their knowledge. Piaget's theory suggests that students need a curriculum that supports their cognitive development by learning concepts and logical steps. He also suggests that children are only capable of learning specific material in specific stages of cognitive development. Piaget emphasizes that learning takes place as a result of active engagement of learners. So teachers have to see the learners take an active role by participating in whatever is being taught and learned. Piaget's theory acknowledges individual differences in cognitive development. Teachers should arrange activities that learners' intellectual development according to the learner's intellectual development. Piaget shows that children's understanding is restricted by stages that he or she that they have reached, and teachers should take this into account as they teach children with different levels of intellectual developments, particularly those children who may have special needs. Okay, so to end this session, um, allow me to share this one. Teachers might not be able to change your students' medical and educational history and prevent cognitive delays from occurring, but we can certainly make a conscious effort to remediate and reduce the impact of any cognitive difficulties. So the strategies of identifying cognitive skills that are age appropriate and teaching them through natural language rich activities could be beneficial for many of our students. So again, we may not be able to change, their medical, especially particular their medical history or educational history or whatever difficulties they may have, but certainly we can make a conscious effort, continuous efforts to remediate whatever the difficulty they are struggling with, and that we can reduce the impact of those, particularly their cognitive difficulties. Okay, so thank you everyone for listening. I hope that you guys are learning from this session on cognitive development. Thank you and have a good day, everybody.